everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How are you all doing? I am doing this intro. It's midnight, basically. Should have put this up earlier, but instead I looked up if any rapper ever used the Night Court theme song in a song. And one person, Cameron, in a remix of Horse and Carriage. That, surprisingly, I don't know much about Silk the Shocker, but their verse is real weak. Look, I don't know much about Silk's other stuff, so I don't want to start anything. I just gotta say though, listening to that verse of his feature, not great. You know what is pretty great though? Today's episode. Today I'm talking to comics creator Cliff Chiang. If you don't know who Cliff is, I'm going to read you his bio right now. Originally from New Jersey, Cliff Chiang wasn't sure of his direction in life, but wanted to give his dream of making comics a try and got an editorial job at DC Vertigo after college. This led to drawing anthology stories and single issues, which led to higher profile gigs on books like Human Target and Wonder Woman. In 2015, Cliff co-created the Eisner Award-winning series Paper Girls with Brian K. Vaughan, which was turned into a canceled way too soon series on Amazon this year. Jason Mantzoukas was in it. It's pretty great. And most recently, he wrote and drew the fantastic miniseries Catwoman Lonely City, which just wrapped up at the end of October. Highly recommended. This is a good talk. I think it started out, Cliff was a little wary, perhaps, of the direction of the show. I'm not sure, but he warmed up pretty quickly and we got into the good stuff, all the existential stuff you tune in for. And, we talk about feeling alienated and being self-aware and knowing your ambitions and following your dreams and all that kind of stuff. Very good talk. So I hope you like it. If you do, what I like to do here in the beginning is a little recommended if you like this talk with Cliff. Maybe you will like other episodes I've done with comics people. For example, Kieran Gillen, Kelly Thompson, Chip Zdarsky, Jim Starlin, Ryan North, Rob Guillory, Cy Spurrier, Michael Kupperman, Chris Claremont, Charles Sewell, and many other people from all different creative walks of life, artists and writers and TV people, musicians, and so on and so forth. If you like what you hear and you want to subscribe to the show, you can do that wherever you get your podcast from. I am on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman. Twitter, very, very quickly circling the drain at this point. Although you can catch my... Okay, so here's the thing. I've been rewatching Night Court. That's why I looked up the whole thing about, hey, has the Night Court theme ever been used in a rap song? And I am just posting pictures of character actors I recognize that I'm seeing as I rewatch Night Court. Anyway, so social media at Andy Beckerman. And I got some amazing episodes coming up. Speaking of comics, Jim Zub is on a future episode. Terry Winter, creator of Boardwalk Empire, Sopranos writer. That was a fantastic talk. So was Alina Lowensohn, who is in some of my favorite Hal Hartley films. Just a wonderful actress, and we get into it. So stay tuned for those. I think, by the way, programming note, I'm going to take next week off for the holidays, but then we'll be right back with all the existential goodness you can handle. So I hope you all have happy holidays and stay safe, mask up. Things are getting bad again. So, okay, enough of that, and let's get into the show. Here's Cliff. So wait, are you in Ohio or are you in New York? Because...
No, I'm not in Ohio.
Okay. There are two things online, and I was just like, because I started in my head, I'm like, you're from New Jersey, so maybe Ohio feels okay. But then I was like, I mean, some of my favorite bands are from Ohio. No shade to Ohio.
Yeah. No, that was like a Paper Girls thing, probably when that was coming out, that it switched location to Ohio.
Okay, so Jersey born, Jersey bred, or well, New York born, Jersey bred, and then living in Manhattan now. That makes sense.
Yeah, and then back in Jersey now, actually.
Oh, you're back in Jersey? So wait, where'd you grow up in Jersey?
Bergen County.
I know Bergen County.
Yeah?
My aunt lived in Wayne for a lot of her life. My aunt lived in a lot of northern New Jersey for a lot of her life, like East Rutherford and Passaic and a bunch of those places. My wife's family lives in around Teaneck or close to Teaneck. I don't know if that's Bergen County.
Yeah, that's near me. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, so you're just like a short ride into the city on like one of those.
Yeah, we're right over the bridge.
One of those small buses.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So okay. So did you move back to Jersey just because it's a good place for your family, or because nostalgic for home?
Mostly for family. Since our families are here, our parents, are here, and then for school and stuff like that for our kids. So just made a lot more sense. We were toughing it out in Brooklyn for as long as we could. We miss it, but it's nice to be. There's something comforting about being in Jersey as well. We know it very well, and it's interesting to come back after so many years.
Do you has the feeling changed? Like, I don't like going home, so I'm from Pennsylvania, and it just feels like all the stuff that I wasn't thrilled about in my youth is amplified as an adult. Like, it really feels like you walk in anywhere and like the temperature changes and everyone's like, oh, the Jew is here. And I am, right. I mean, not really, like no one's overtly anti-Semitic, but there's that.
I'll give it a month.
Yeah, depending on who wins the election, we'll see how that frees people. But you can tell the smell in the air changes, the temperature, everything's a little more like the little hairs on the back of my head stand up. So I don't know if Jersey felt like that to you, but
there's some ways in which, there are things that I'd forgotten about the area, about being in Jersey, but it's not. Yeah, it's definitely not Brooklyn, and it's just a different pace of life, I think, and people are definitely more, cocooned, I think. Everybody's kind of got their house or whatever, and they drive around everywhere, and so I think it changes how community operates. Like, what makes community? What are the bonding, things within the community? Whereas when you're in New York, sometimes it can feel distant, but like there's a sense of like everybody being in it together, regardless. And that's just the nature of like, just how dense it is and everything. But once you're out in the suburbs, it feels a little different. So it's kind of discovering what it is. What is the glue that that binds the town together?
So what is it for you? I mean, do you feel like you are part of the community in New Jersey, wherever you live, or do you feel distant?
We're still working our way into it, and I think part of that is like, it being different. It's a different town from where I grew up. And then, and things have changed, like, and then it's a different community. And so it's, we haven't gotten out as much because of the pandemic. We've been super careful. So it means we're not interacting with people in the same way. There's not like a regular place we go to because we don't, to eat every week because we don't dine indoors, that kind of thing. So it's been tricky and a slow process of integrating into.
Yeah. I feel you. Things have changed in the pandemic. My wife and I are also 99% safe. We don't eat indoors. There's a lot of stuff we don't do. Or if we have to go indoors somewhere, it's N95s, and I just bought a portable air purifier to carry around, and we now have a little CO2 thing just to check the airflow.
Right. Yeah.
It definitely feels different in the pandemic, but I asked that because like before the pandemic, I didn't feel like I always had a sense of community. Growing up in Pennsylvania, surely I had a lot of good friends. And so I had good friend groups, but whatever community I was supposed to be a part of, whether it's, my school or even like other like my temple or something like that, I always felt like the weird person on the outskirts, no matter what group it was. And I'm wondering if you, even before the pandemic, if you had a sense of community, either growing up or, as an adult, or if you also felt alienated like I did.
Yeah, I think that is, I don't know how much of that is like, true, like that feeling of alienation. Like, are you actually being alienated? Like, are people going out of their way to, or is it some sort of internalized insecurity that makes you feel like you're not part of the group,
Yeah, totally. So, the second one.
Yeah, and certainly, yeah, I think that's something that I felt growing up. I think that, nobody ever, well, it's rare to find, people who are, so confident of their, of how, I don't know, how gregarious and how charming that they are, that they feel like they're always, accepted. So yeah, I definitely felt that growing up, and it's interesting to think how that has carried over to me as an adult too, and the ways in which, I'm not always looking to win people over. Like, I'm okay with not being the most popular person, like I find that kind of exhausting in its own way when I do have to, be, out socializing. When I go to comic conventions, a big part of that is getting to meet your readers, and the people who are buying the books. And it's really important. And it's fulfilling for me as well, because I can get to make that connection and see who's, following my work. But at the end of it, when I'm done with it, on Sunday night, I'm exhausted because it's not something that I usually do, during the day when I'm at home. Like I just don't have that much interaction. It's just me and the computer, or me and a piece of paper. And it's, it takes so much out of you. And there are people for whom, they do that more regularly and they're good at it, or they're just used to it. And, but after a weekend of that, I'm exhausted and kind of just want to curl up into a ball.
So here's the thing though. Is there any measure of confidence you get from either your work, from accolades you've gained from your work, from attaining a certain position because of your work, that allows you to not care? Like you said, though, I don't care if I'm, the most popular person or whatever, right? I'm paraphrasing, but like, was that always the way where you felt like that, or is it something that you've attained through that, or through something else, therapy, whatever else that, doesn't have to just be linked to your position or to like your creative output?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think certainly earlier in my career, I was much needier about, getting, kind of affirmation of what I was doing, and just the knowledge, knowing that I needed to get my name out there a bit more, and in order to be able to do work, like you're kind of only as good as your last job. And then if nobody hears about that job, then that's a problem. Mm-hmm. So like on the one hand, you're balancing the quality of your work that you do yourself, and then also, the promotion of it, but I'm really not great at the promotion of it, because it's really not where my interest lies. It feels very external to the process. Mm-hmm. But I think, you do this for enough years and you do end up building up a body of work that ends up hopefully speaking for itself.
Are you just a shy person, or are you just annoyed by these other aspects that don't pertain straight to the actual creative work that you want to do?
A bit of both. I tend to not want to engage if I don't have to. I do like listening, that's the thing. With all like these social media platforms and stuff like that, I don't actually engage that much, but I like the feed. I like seeing the things that come my way. And and seeing how people react to each other and what they're saying. It's, at a party, I'm more likely to try and find someone that I can talk to and have a really great conversation with one-on-one, or with just a few people, as opposed to trying to hit everybody at the in the room. And so, I get more out of that,
Yeah.
So doing, the promotion and stuff like that feels more like hosting a party rather than attending one. And, there's some people for whom, that's definitely more fun for them.
Yeah, no, not me. Yeah, that's my party strategy, is to plant myself with one or two people who I know, and then stay there and have one conversation the entire time, and then leave. And then I'm like, oh, that was good. That was a good party.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So I'm starting to kind of get a picture of you. And I'm curious.
It's weird. I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm an introvert necessarily, I do like being social. I do like seeing friends, and I can be very chatty at these things. It's just large groups I don't do well in. And then, and if I don't know anybody, then it's just easier for me to hang back.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, let me ask this then. Is this an energy thing? Is it that you are conserving your energy for either your work or for your family or for something else? Or is it a disdain, or a combination of both, or something else that I haven't thought of?
It's probably both. Yeah. I've struggled over the years to figure out how much of a misanthrope I am. But I do enjoy people. I do like people. It's just not most people. So it does feel like a bit of a waste of energy, or, sometimes you just talk to somebody and they're just not into you, you're just not clicking with them, and you just don't have the interest. And so you can try to push past that, but, I just find I don't have the patience for that anymore. And, I'd rather,
Yeah.
I mean, there are people, you can just tell when somebody's more curious and willing to talk and discover things. And then there's some people who just, are need something from somebody, and that's all they're looking for,
Yeah, there was a point where I started to force myself, even if I know this person is uninteresting, to try to have the conversation with them just for practice, or just to see what I could do, because I did spend a lot of time misanthropic. Not necessarily misanthropic, but just like you, I think, is the more, so like a hint of misanthropy in there. But generally, trying to just not reference something weird, not reference Mr. Show, or not reference, just, can I have a normal conversation with this finance bro at this party in Astoria, just to see if I can do it. And
right. The challenge of that. Is, can I do it? It's like a weird, it's like playing a video game, like, how far can I get into this conversation? And then, do they tap out, or do I tap out,
Exactly. Yeah. It's a version of one of the text games from when I was a kid, like Zork or something like that, where I'm trying to get to the end of this party, I suppose, and keep it going, keep the branches going. It was really like that. And I think I was like, at some point I proved to myself, okay, I can do this if I really want to, but it does take a lot of energy. And that's why I asked you, is it energy for your work, your family? Because I realized, it's a thing that I bring up a lot on this show, but I call it the entropy problem, where you only have a certain amount of energy in a day, and how are you actually going to proportion it out? Because, right now, my wife and I are, we have a bunch of creative projects in different states, and the cat had to go to the vet yesterday, go to the internist yesterday because of a bunch of inflammations and all this other kinds. And just the dishes are now in the sink. And if I was going to have a conversation with a finance bro right now, it would be 10 seconds long, because I just don't have the energy. And that's why I asked about that, because I'm it took me a while into adulthood to realize that, as opposed to kind of being unself-aware a little bit before, and not really, just doing whatever was in front of me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think, it's a subconscious calculation at this point, and there are a lot of things that have to be done that I don't have a choice, that need to get done. And then there are things that, just, you try to figure out, how much energy you have for the other work, for the creative work, and there's some days when, you're so busy doing all the other stuff that there's not much left. So, and then the next day you just clear the deck, so it is a, bit of you're trying to balance things a bit more, but, I try not to, try to do some things in the morning, get that stuff out of the way, and then I can have large blocks of time. For me, big blocks of uninterrupted time are important. I remember trying out, sort of, productivity techniques like the Pomodoro stuff, the timer and everything like that. And like, by the time, you got through 23 minutes, is that what it was? I forget what it was. That's just when I was getting started, really. There's a certain amount of warm-up time to drawing or writing or any of that, just once I found it like very interruptive of getting into a flow state. Because once I'm working, then it could go for hours, but it's ramping up and getting that head of steam. When I used to work in an office, I could see how that would be really, useful, because you do then attack tasks in a different way. But it's a bunch of different little tasks as opposed to here's a page that you need to draw. Here's a page of comics,
Yeah. I mean, you seem like a pretty self-aware person. You kind of understand how your creativity works or what the best way is to access that and work with it. Is this something have you always been like this? Is this something you gained through therapy or just adulthood, or I'm curious?
I've always tried to be somewhat analytical about the creative process, just because I think it's very easy to go the other way and be too loosey-goosey about it. And having worked in editorial, I've worked with artists and writers and kind of seen their quirks. So I've seen the spectrum of behavior, and some people are very locked down, very 9 to 5, and they're super productive. Other people, are night owls, and, they can only work when kind of the inspiration strikes, and what they do is, brilliant, but then less, it doesn't necessarily work for a schedule, or a deadline. So, not knowing where I was in that spectrum, and, and the, my personal life having, the demands change. So you kind of have to go with it, there was a point where, when I was in my 20s, starting work at like 11 p.m. or whatever, and working, throughout the night, into the morning wasn't a big deal. And you could do that a lot, if you needed to. But, like once I had a kid, that's a thing that doesn't move, if he needs to be fed as a baby, there's nothing you can do about that. You can't shift that anywhere, or if he needs to be picked up from daycare. And that forces you to have to adapt to that, and so now I'm, much more 9 to 5, or at least I was. And then I moved, from, Brooklyn, where I had a separate studio space, to New Jersey. And so now I'm working from home in an office, space. And that's been really weird because now, like, work is always there. So often I'm working after dinner, until whenever, midnight or so, Whereas before, when I was in a separate studio space, to go back to that, even though it was only a couple blocks away, to go back to that office after dinner was too much. Like your brain had already turned off, and and just having, to walk a block away was enough to deter you, and also push you throughout the day to be like, okay, I've got to get all this done by 6 p.m. or whatever. So there's, it's weird how your brain works, and what, and if you need to get work done in a certain amount of time, it's surprising what you can do, but you need to convince yourself that it has to get done.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you said you're an analytical person. Is that in general, like the analytic part is the main part? I'm asking, let me just go back to myself for a second, because this is why I'm asking this. I grew up very emotional, and then at some point I tamped that down unconsciously and became very analytical, was like that for a long time, and have been slowly integrating these two parts of myself in adulthood. So that instead, because there was also a point where I would have to jump from, if I was doing philosophical work or something like that, it was very analytical, and then I would go to make a joke, and it would be, or like someone would say a joke, and it would take me a second to recognize that they were joking because I was in this analytical mode. And now it's a lot more fluid. I feel like a fuller person. But that was just me because I started off emotional in the first place. And I'm wondering if you've always kind of just been an analytical person. Do you access your emotions often, or do you access them outwardly?
Yeah, that sounds familiar. I think, I don't know. I mean, as a kid, I seemed emotional, but was I more or less emotional than another kid? I have no idea. It's kind of like, that's my perception of myself. And, there's definitely, I don't know. I guess I've always, been somewhat analytical, even as a kid. And so maybe it's not, the thing that got pushed down probably was just more the loud outbursts and that kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think part of me liking being an observer is to see the patterns in things, and then maybe there's patterns in myself and my own behavior that I can at least observe and try and work around or control, because I think not being self-aware is really dangerous. We all know people like that, and you want to, I think for me at least, I want to try to minimize the collateral damage. It's not so much for me as it is like, I don't want to drag other people down with me,
Do you think that you were, as a kid, that you were put on a certain path? Like, you went to Harvard, right? Mm-hmm. Is that something you wanted to do? I'm curious. I'll just give the reason why I'm curious about this kind of stuff. I'm very curious about people's trajectories. Like, in grad school, I did a lot of stuff on philosophy of complexity theory, which is all about trajectories and how, and in my mind, especially when I'm writing characters, in my mind, people are a bunch of faders on like a mixer that move with time. Or I also see them as vectors and then different things buffeting them in certain directions. That's at least how I visualize it. And that's the model I use that when I talk to people on this show. But, that in my mind, this is the very like stereotyped thing in my mind, is that going to Harvard puts you on a path to do some kind of elite work, right? Not that being an artist or being a writer in comic books, especially now, right, is not considered that kind of work, but like maybe, especially when you went, I think in the 90s, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't as respected as it is now. Right. And I'm kind of curious about the path that you were on, how you felt about that path. And then, what is it that, if it was a different path you were on, what led you to make the kind of existential choices to do this work?
As a kid, I don't know, how much I was encouraged to find a path. It's just, you're on a path, the easy one, the one that's most obvious, is just like an academic path, right? I mean, it's the easiest thing to follow because you're in school, you get your grades, it funnels you into, a way of life, and for me, having done well in school, it was expected, then this is where you go and this is where you end up. And I think once I got to college, it was really strange because that path suddenly opened up so much. There was definitely, you could go to school and then go down a professional path, become a lawyer or a consultant, or, go into banking, that kind of thing. But then if you weren't going to do that, if you weren't going to be a doctor or whatever, then what were you going to do? That choice to me, was really, I wasn't sure how to navigate it. And I didn't know, I wasn't prepared to make that choice. I didn't feel like, because I spent so much time hedging my bets, trying to have at least one foot in the professional door. So much so that, I took my LSATs and I applied to law school,
Yeah, me too.
But in my heart, I wanted to make comics. I went in thinking perhaps even I was going to, make films. But then, as I kind of got back into reading comics as an adult, saw all the potential in that kind of storytelling and realized that I could potentially do it all by myself if I wanted to, certainly without, a huge, outlay of money and time and collaboration with actors and writers and sound people, lighting and all that kind of stuff. This could be a very direct way of me telling stories. And I didn't know that I had a dread about having to go down this professional path and knowing that it wasn't really a passion of mine, but it was safe. And at the same time, I knew that, I wanted to do comics or something in the arts, but I wasn't really ready for that. And I think there's a different mindset to that as well that I needed to develop. I was lucky enough that after I graduated, I deferred law school for a couple of years. I knew it just wasn't something I was ready to do and didn't really want to do. I was, I ended up feeding them a line about going to Taiwan and getting in touch with my roots and teaching English and stuff, which I never did. But, as an excuse, it was fairly bulletproof, and so I got this 2-year deferral thinking, well, look, at the end of 2 years, if I don't have some sort of, career in comics going, then I'll go to law school. And luckily within that time, I was able to, work in editorial and start doing, some art as well. So, when 2 years came around, I felt pretty confident about letting that go. But, if I'd gone into college thinking, knowing I'm an artist and this is the path I was going to take, I would have done things probably very differently. I don't know whether that it might have helped, there's definitely more, part of me wonders, if I'd gone to an art school, how that would have changed me and my approach to drawing, just in terms of skills, and that sort of thing. But, so at the same time, I don't regret any of the time that I spent trying to figure it out, because it just means there's other things to draw from. It's a wider breadth of experience.
Yeah, this is a counterfactual, so it might be unanswerable, but I'll ask it anyway. If those 2 years had expired and you hadn't kind of figured out a pathway into comics, do you think you would have actually gone to law school, or do you think you still would have been like, well, maybe another year to try to figure things out?
I think, it would depend on what I was doing. I think if I hadn't gotten any of the work in comics, working on staff and stuff like that, then I probably would have been doing something that would have made me draw comics on the side at home, and I probably would have done more independent comics, and might have a very different career. As it is, kind of came up through DC Comics doing a kind of more mainstream superhero oriented comic, and if it was this other path, then, I'd be doing something more along the lines of drawn and quarterly Fantagraphics stuff, perhaps more, just fiction as opposed to genre fiction, So, it is interesting. Yeah, I would like to think that it would have found a way to make it work. My desire to do it was so strong that, I just would have taken a different path. So I think it's probably likely, that I would have found something within those 2 years and hopefully, would have been enough for me to push off, going to law school.
Yeah. This also might be unanswerable. So again, I'll just ask and we'll see where we go. But I had read a really good interview with you that actually got a lot into your childhood. And so I'm just like, you've already answered these questions. I don't know what I'm going to ask. But like in it, you talked about how your mom was an opera singer in the 60s. Yeah. And then when she had kids, she kind of gave that up and became an accountant, I think, at Pan Am, if I remember correctly.
That's right. Yeah.
And I'm wondering if I'm always curious about this only because I think I also saw a little bit of regret in my parents when I was younger. And I wonder, do you think she regretted not following opera singing? Did you kind of catch a whiff of that when you were younger at all? If so, I'm just wondering about like how that all struck you when you were a kid.
I remember hearing those stories as a kid and being kind of in awe of this other life, this other life that your parents have before you, that you only hear snippets of. I don't think I was old enough to really hear the regret. And it was there. But I think, my parents and their generation, and being, first generation immigrants, they were far more practical, than I would be. But it is something that I think I was, more or less aware of, as an adult, as a young adult, and aware of it, whether or not she was sad about it, but just like that there was a road not taken. And the reasons for that are, there are a lot of reasons for it, like maybe she didn't feel confident about it. Maybe it's also, a product of, the 60s and my dad and like, sexism and like him expecting her, to have a certain kind of job and also be available to take care of kids and stuff like that, so she, she didn't grow up thinking, that she had that kind of independence, but, I think, if she were to, right. I mean, that's definitely, I think, something that she would maybe do differently. I don't think there's necessarily regret, but like, I think she often wonders, what if I had done that? And, and that's, I don't like feeling that. I regret is probably the biggest, thing for me. I do, right. I do regret some of the things that I've done, but like, there are ways in which I want to take the leap. And then if that's a mistake, then I can own that, but not having tried it, doesn't sit well with me, and so each project I have, is in some sense a risk that I have to, I try to make sure that there's some uncertainty to it. There's something new that I need to try to achieve. So that's the challenge of it. And then, and also to make sure that it's something that, is, something that I wouldn't regret, not trying,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so much of your life resonates with me. It's not the exact same, but I mean, there's hints of similarities or there's, echoes or something like that. Just, like you and I are the same generation. My grandparents are immigrated from, from Eastern Europe. And so I'm the generation that was supposed to be the doctor, the lawyer, right? That kind of, all that kind of like the pressures. And I don't know if they were overt in your household. They weren't in mine. But again, I picked up, my antenna was up enough to pick up on like what my parents wanted, even if they weren't being verbal about it. And I don't know if like, that's why I asked about all the like regret or, did they have a path they wanted for you? Because I think and you're just a little bit older than me, but I think we're close enough that I think a lot of it there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah. I think, as a parent now, I can recognize how, your parents want the best for you and they want you to be secure. Most of all, and security for them was a big thing. So having a legitimate job, as opposed to, something a little bit more freeform, for them was a big deal. And, I wanted, being able to, I don't think I would have had the patience or the fortitude really to go through with, law school or any other kind of job like that. I was always, I think as a kid, too interested in the arts to do that. And if I'm not interested in something, I will definitely tune out, and I shudder to think what that would be if I hadn't, if I were doing something that I didn't love.
Yeah. Yeah. So then what was your childhood like? You're a middle child, right? Growing up in New Jersey. Did you have did you have friends? Did you feel like you had groups that you belonged to? Did you feel like you belonged in your family? Like what was your life like then? Emotionally and both I don't know what the other word I'm looking for is besides emotionally and I guess just your daily life, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely had friends. Probably would have liked to have had more friends or to see them more often. I think I probably, was not, I didn't live, most of my good friends were kind of like on another part of town and they lived in like, this one little housing development, and so I didn't see them as much as I would have liked to, so I spent a lot of time, at home reading and doing my homework and all that kind of stuff. But, and once I was in high school, things got a little bit easier in some ways. Because I was getting my work done and then starting to have a little bit more freedom, to do things and go places. And, and certainly by the time, I was graduating, I had a severe case of senioritis, but it was a lot of fun. It was just, just being able to hang out and all the time. And, I was getting stuff done. It wasn't a problem, and so it was a taste of what being an adult might be like. So I think a pretty normal, if quiet childhood, and a lot of things that I was into, were, like comics and cartoons and certain kinds of music or whatever. They tended to be private affairs, where I wasn't able to share these things with other people because they just weren't into them, like comics and like sci-fi fantasy novels and things like that. It's like my friends were not reading that stuff. So it became my thing, or the thing that I talked about with my brothers, and that's okay too. I think learning to relate to people and have similar, find other interests, is a good thing. But, I think it also, I don't know. Yeah. I didn't explore that stuff as much as openly as I would have liked, I guess, because there was no other, because of the stigma too, that it's kind of nerdy, fair. And back then, you didn't want to go near that,
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you're in high school and you're trying to, trying to impress people, and trying not to stick out, in that way. now it's so odd to see how the coin has flipped, where, you know, all geek culture, so to speak, you know, is all over the place, you know, and so, you know, seeing superheroes and make, you know, all this kind of money and just be everywhere, you know, it's a different world, and people are you know, I think it's great, you know, I think people are you know, kids growing up, so much more stuff that they can read and listen to and be into and not be ostracized for it, you know, like, I don't know what, you know, like the things that people were teased for when I was growing up seem to not be trigger points anymore, you know?
Right. No one's going to make fun of me for knowing deep X-Men history now. I mean, right. They might still not care, but that's not it. But like, is there a point? So, I mean, my theory on this show, and I think there's enough anecdotal evidence at this point that bears it out, is that, you know, at some point there's like a wedge that kind of pushes you apart from other people, that makes you either self-aware or self-aware enough to know that you want to pursue this path. Because at the time, I mean, maybe now people would pursue it because it's lucrative or it has the possibility of being lucrative. But at the time, it wasn't. You know, at the time, and also, I guess there's also a difference between the people who want to work in entertainment, whatever branch of entertainment, because it is lucrative, and there's the people that want to do it because they have a need to tell a story that's inside of them or create something that's inside them and get it out. Like, to me, it's just like, it's literally physical. Like, if I haven't written for a couple days or something like that, I start to get anxious, and like it just builds up in my brain. And then, like, you know, I can tweet something to like open up the steam, like let some steam out a little bit, and that'll do it. But it's not the same as like creating something like a script or whatever, right? But I'm wondering, is this like an early wedge, like just your interests? Was that an early wedge that kind of like started to push you apart from people, or are there other things, or is there nothing? And this is not this theory I have does not hold for you.
A wedge that pushes you away from, that pushes you towards the creative path you take?
I think just away from other people enough, and doesn't necessarily, there's no necessity to this when I say this, right? It doesn't mean that you're going to become a creative person. It just means it's giving you the space to become self-aware or become that observer that you need to be in order to do high level creative work, to actually be able to observe people and then be like, and then process that through your brain into characters and things like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question about identity. You know, for me, growing up Taiwanese in New Jersey suburbs there were all these different facets of my life that didn't necessarily merge. You know, there was like kind of me and my friends at school, you know, and being Asian, you know, definitely, you know, at that time was, there were fewer in town. And so it definitely made me feel a little bit different from them. And then as we got older, you know, my parents kind of finding, you know, having more of a community with other Taiwanese families in the area, and then going to kinds of, you know, summer programs with them that are centered around cultural, Taiwanese cultural, programs, events. And then there was like church too, because like my mom is very religious, and then my dad got into it too. And so we were going to church, and it was a Taiwanese church. So, you know, these were all things that kind of, you know, there were friends who there were Taiwanese friends who didn't go to church too. So it was like these weird subsets of everything that made me realize, like, you know, like you're not just one person all the time, you know, that there are these different facets to you, and that these parts were also kind of hidden from my friends at school, you know, because for lots of reasons, you know, either because, you know, they weren't Protestants, you know, or because they weren't Taiwanese, you know, and, you know, so it gave me a sense, you know, of being not necessarily on the outside, but that there were different lenses by which to view the world, and so, within those, those communities, that there were different, kind of rules, behavior, hierarchies, and all that sort of stuff. So, being, having to kind of jump between those, I think was useful, for me to try and understand the world, and those kinds of, there's no real like monolithic culture, and I think that's what's surprising. So just navigating those different subcultures was really informative for me. There is no monolithic culture anywhere. There's always going to be little factions. There's always going to be little subsets where different interests and different rules apply, which is why, like, I kind of find it fascinating that, people are so surprised by some of the political divisions we have now. To me, those, it's clear those have always existed, and what, the internet and social media has done is make it easier to find people with similar beliefs, and there's power in numbers. So you get 5 people together, they can start talking amongst themselves about something, and that grows. And when it's for something that's helpful, or underrepresented, that's great, but when it becomes, weird fringe ideas, that's pretty awful. So, I don't know, I think, being kind of an outsider, not necessarily, it's just always been like that. I don't necessarily feel pushed to the outside, but it's part of my identity.
Yeah. Was there ever a point where you found a community where you felt like you could be yourself, capital Y yourself, whatever that means to you?
Yeah. I mean, I don't feel like I'm not myself when I'm with my friends, whether or not they understand all of me, I mean, there's that, I don't know. I guess there's always that kind of weird gulf, of like, how much do other people really know me? I think, I think my wife understands me. I think she understands me as much as anybody could. She, and, she grew up in Jersey, as well. And in a lot of ways, we have very similar backgrounds, both professionally and just growing up. So, it's hard to know. I mean, I don't always feel like I'm holding back anything, when I'm with people, but I'm trying to be honest and sincere, like, whenever I'm doing stuff, whenever I'm talking to people. If I can't do that, then my interest in being around that person or doing that thing drops.
Yeah. Cause I get the picture of you just from talking, right? As someone who is both sensitive and analytic, you don't seem to have trouble traversing that stuff. It seems like you're pretty, like you understand yourself, and at the same time, searching I think, but I don't know. That's just, I mean, obviously I'm just throwing some slight observations based on talking for an hour at you. I don't know if that, I don't know how much of that is true.
I don't know. I guess, I feel like everybody's searching on some level. It's definitely more, perhaps more, you can pin it on something when you're talking with an artist. That searching becomes, you can see it in their work. The work is a product of that search. Whereas without that, it might be trickier to figure out what that searching is.
We're right at the end. I've just been obsessed with ambition lately, and I don't mean ambition like I want to be the best blank. I mean, like, when you were younger, did you have a thing you wanted to be?
No. When I look back at my childhood, I don't feel like there was anything that was clear. I don't think it was ever, like, in hindsight, yes, I drew a lot from a very young age. I always loved, comic strips, Peanuts and Garfield and all that stuff. I love cartoons, but do those push someone to become an artist? I don't know. You could look at that stuff and say, sure, of course he became a comic book artist, right? But for years I did not know. I didn't have a thing that I wanted to be, consuming comic strips and comic books and stuff like that. I love that stuff, but I never thought of it as a job that somebody had, that somebody actually made. Like, even if I knew the writer and the artist or something, it's just the idea of doing that as for a living just never crossed my mind, and it wasn't like I thought, like when you're really young, you're going to be a policeman or a firefighter, you dress up like your 4-year-old, like, in a uniform, and I never had that. I just knew, I liked drawing. I did pretty well in school, and that was like an identity thing, just, you want to do well, and that's it. But I always enjoyed drawing. I could always lose myself in it, but, I didn't realize it was a calling until later. And that calling kind of came because I was in college and realized that maybe I couldn't sustain interest in anything else to do it, which is why, started out as an English major because I liked reading, because I like reading stories and books, and, and that was the only thing that could have, kept me going through classes, was reading different stuff, but I wasn't like, especially interested in like history or economics or, and realizing then, like, am I hitting a wall here of what I can actually do, what I can achieve, because I just don't have it in me. I don't have it in me to do anything else. And kind of on one level, that's like really scary, because is that a limitation, And then on the other hand, is it freeing? Because no, all this other stuff is open to you. You just hadn't really thought about it before. And, but that's probably intimidating in its own way. So, but it took me years, I think, to realize that, to accept that I was an artist at heart, and to get away from some of the mentality that I had of, achieving things within a structure, it's whether it be school or in terms of office work, once I had to go freelance, and realizing that everything depends on you, that you work for yourself, that took a while to figure out, and that's also maybe a mindset that people should have, even if they're going to work at a large company. A friend of mine who, like, he asked me very pointedly when I was, working at DC, he's like, who do you work for? I was like, I gave him, my answer, work for Time Warner here. He's like, no, you work for yourself. Like, they're hiring you, they're borrowing your time. But at the end of the day, you're always working for yourself, and he, he's an illustrator. And so he's very aware of that duality of kind of, you're working for a client, but if you can have that mindset, as opposed to someone who kind of goes into the machine and thinks that they serve the machine, no, you're how you do there helps the machine, but you're still working for yourself, and that was a big eye opener for me at that age, and helped me tremendously when 6 months later I left the company to go freelance. So it took a lot, and it happened in stages. But when I finally came to grips with the fact that I was an artist, it made sense, but it wasn't quite like this weird, like, joyous, finding of identity. It was a sort of like, it was a sort of a relief.
Right. Angels
like,
didn't
this is who I am.
But yes.
Yeah.
Oh, Cliff, that seems like a lovely place to end, actually. Thank you for going on this journey with me.
Thank you. Thank you for asking these great questions. These are not the sorts of, things I get to think about that often. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for doing it. I always wonder sometimes where I'm like, would you prefer if I was just like, so what do you think Catwoman is thinking in panel 6?
Well, there's so many of those kinds of, there's so many of those kinds of interviews, and you find yourself repeating yourself a lot, in them, which can be a good or bad thing. But it's always good to have these. I think people do get a lot out of hearing people's stories like this, as opposed to just the nitty gritty of creative decisions. Yeah.
I really, I think about so my wife just did a press day. She's on a TV show, and they just did a press day, and it was literally, she was in a room with one of the other actors, and they just not even brought in, it was on Zoom. So every 10 minutes was a new press outfit. I'm sure you've done stuff like this where it's just
only recently, this past summer for Paper Girls, we had to do that. And it was my first time at that rodeo, and it was incredible to see someone who had done it before, just how they managed that. And really, you do want to say the same thing over and over, because it's part of the message that you're putting out there, on a marketing level. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. But I personally don't feel like I was very good at it, but other people said I was okay. But I was watching other people who just felt so natural and so engaging while doing it. I'm in awe of it as a skill.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's a skill. My wife and I have another podcast, and she does, I would say 90% of the ad reads, because I'm like, you have that skill. I have my own thing I'm happy with, but that is yours. That I just can't. I can't read ads. I can't smile and say the same thing 30 times in a row, and make it engaging every time.
I think with me, I feel when I'm in those situations, I feel the smile start to falter a bit, and I become hyper aware of that, even though nobody would notice. But that just, spirals into, me not being as, in the moment and being able to respond as quickly and as well. So it just gets bad fast.
Yep. All right. Well, I'll let you go. Thanks again for being on the show.
Yeah. Thank you.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye.